Today at Solus Partners, we're really excited to introduce Elisabeth with Boxsy. Elisabeth has created a very unique communication platform and really a marketplace of ideas to connect both founders and investors through a more of a tailored approach. Elisabeth, could you tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for Boxsy and just generally what inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent 10 years at PwC in consulting, and I actually had a chance to build the US Salesforce practice for them, and I really enjoyed building. So in 2017, when I was about to sign my life away, I actually quit and went to the pre-IPO world called the Bay Area and Silicon Valley and joined a late stage startup. That was a great transition for me. But since 2017, I've been in the ecosystem, as a operator, go to market mainly, pre-sale, sales, as well as an angel investor and an advisor for startups. And so at the end of 2022, when ChatGPT came out, I really was like, if I have to build a B2B sales process for another startup, shooting myself in the head. That's really what happened. I was like, there has to be a better way to help startups or founders, entrepreneurs in terms of their operations. So the idea originally was all about ops in a box. Like, how can we really guide founders in terms of setting up all the crap, I call it, that we don't want to do as founders, right? We want to build and we want to sell. The rest is like, oh my God, we got to do all this to scale, right? And so that's really how the idea came about. Obviously, it took some time in 23 to think through it and meet I was still working. And so, met a lot of founders and getting validation. One of them was like, oh, you're building startup for dummies. And I was like, interesting way to put it, and then with AI going so fast, it moved from guidance and really like best practice, almost having a Sherpa with you, kind of guiding you through how to build a company to, hey, how far can we keep guiding, but also set up, automate, orchestrate, right? For founders and entrepreneurs. So that's really how the vision evolved. And that's still what we want to do. But what we realize is one big part of being a founder in some cases is funding, right? You got to go find funding, whether with the typical VC investors or accelerators, sometimes grants or other organizations that give non-dilutive money out there. And so when we were talking to them too, we realized that there was, a bit of a breaking point, right? They had some tools to do this, but nobody was really brought together on a platform. And so we decided by getting that feedback that that's where we should really bring this two-sided relationship OS, which at the end of the day is to create a virtuous circle for both sides to be more successful on the startup side. And therefore, if they're more successful, make more money for the investors, right? They risk the investments and increase their ROI. And so that's really how the idea and the evolution of the product has been.
So, I imagine you guys are really replacing what is traditionally like an email-based thread and chain with VCs going back and forth with founders and trying to get like data dumps. Like, how do you play into that kind of typical conversation or maybe replace that conversation?
Yeah, to be honest, there's some solutions out there, but very siloed, right? What we were really trying to do is break those silos and say, hey, listen, at the end of the day, for both sides to be successful, it's almost you got to have this constant collaboration. And I think that's a bit the change of mindset we're trying to push, and it's the right time based on what's going on in the VC world and the changes happening, where we're really trying to, get people out of email or in waiting mode in some cases. Well, I'm just waiting for the updates. I don't want to push anything on my founders to more, hey, what's really going on, and can we help you? How can we help you? And so, and same thing, it's a change of mindset on the founders. Sometimes we don't want to tell that, hey, our growth is flat or we're pivoting. Like some of the stuff that you're trying to spin. But the reality is that this is what's going on. Doesn't mean you're not going to be successful, but you're going to twist and turn, right? It's not a straight line. So we're really trying to change that mindset. And to your point, it's really breaking the silos and bringing all that data into one platform. So we have better visibility, better insights. And now how do we really help more startups and investors? And again, we're very focused on early stage. That's where we are right now. But yeah, it's, how do we get all that data, that great data that you can really now imply a lot of trends or, where are the pitfalls or anything like that out of emails, to your point, text message, WhatsApp, and really build that into the platform. And that's AI powered. So, yeah.
Well, and I imagine it helps founders build credibility where instead of like going through across like 5 or 6 different channels of communication, it's a little bit easier to give a single investor update or prospective investor update through Boxsy in showing kind of a little bit more data and granularity behind those updates. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of the feedback we get as founders from investors is it's all about building a like a trustful relationship, a transparent and trustful relationship at the end of the day. And, I think if you do that early on and maybe sometimes pass the fear of like, hey, I'm not going to share everything, but I'm going to share some key metrics and say, hey, this is the metrics I'm really looking at. This is what I'm going to deliver, and showing that you're delivering. I think that builds faster trust and transparency and execution, execution track record, if I can say that, right? That,
Yeah.
hey, I will send my updates every month. Yes, this is the numbers that we're really trying to grow. It might not always go the way you want it, but at least it's out there, And so, yeah, I think it's really that we're trying to accelerate, in a way, fundraising for people, in the sense of like, not, hey, we're going to go find you the right people quite yet. That's not the first step. It's not helping you find the investors, but it's like we're prepping you that when you have those conversations, you're like building those relationships, and, you're being transparent, you're showing what's going on. And it's almost like a done deal, right? Like you're trying to remove the obstacle for the investor to say, no, we don't want to invest. We're trying to really move that, right? And again, it's not just metrics, right? It's also founder, they have to meet us, they have to trust us, they have to, like build that also person. It's not just metrics, but metrics helps, right? If you can show that you've already put in place certain things, that you're ahead of the game, I think that gives you a lot of credibility with investors to then be like, hey, I'm ready to do this. I'm ready to take your capital and deploy it properly. So yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. And imagine that it's going to hopefully shrink what is typically a 90 to 100-day conversational cycle into maybe 30 to 60, like you indicated. If you've got everything that's ready to go, it's a little bit more of a compressed yes at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're trying to do. And so that's what the idea is to really incent, even when you're having early conversation, which I've had as founders, a lot of us, you have investors pinging you, you're too early, but this is your first interaction with them. And I'm a bit guilty of this. I rarely say no, because I'm like, hey, at least let's get in their radar for a 15-minute call. And by the way, I try to get them as a potential customer for us, but that's a different story. But, you try to build that and say, okay, would you at least want to be on our investor updates? And so then from there, even though we know we're early, they're saying hey, I am updating every month. This is where we're going. Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah, absolutely.
From that perspective, it's also that sometimes early stage where you might not reconnect with them for the next 6 months or 12 months, but at least they continue seeing the execution. And so for them, when you finally hit the threshold that they're, you need to be seen at this rate, this traction, and it's like, to your point, right? It's not 90 days. They've seen it. They can review all the data that you've been sharing with them. And it's a condensed fundraising cycle.
That's really exciting. In terms of kind of like feedback that you've been hearing either from investors or founders, like what does that look like? What do you see kind of the platform evolving over the next maybe 12 months?
Yeah, in terms of, the founders, what I was really worried about is, how much are you ready to share, or do you want to share? And it's funny, we didn't get like 90% said, no, let's not share. It was more, yeah, I want to be able to control what I share, when I share, to who I share. Right. And I think that's fair. And so that was it was a good surprise. Like, I mean, it's not that we were potentially thinking the worst, but, it is proprietary data. It is data that, especially early stage, we don't always have very clean and all that. So, at least having those parameters that founders can control made sense, right? It was not just free for all. Let's just share everything. We still got a certain percentage that was like, I'll never do that. I'm too early. My data is crap. It's going to look really bad. I would have to explain almost every day what's going on in the company. So, we also got that detractors that's like, I'm not ready for this, right? Which is fair. On the investor side, what we got was a bit of, same thing. I think you found some investors that were like, oh my God, yes, I want more transparency. So then I can really jump in and be like, what's going on? How can we help? Versus waiting for the investor updates. And then you're like, too late now. You can't jump in. Even if you jump in, it's too far down the line. So we got those investors that are like, absolutely, please. And then, by the way, can you give us that, maybe figure out a way to get that transparency even before the deal, right? So then we get to really see what's going on. We can track them. We don't miss a deal when they really hit what we want them to hit, right? And then we had other investors that were like, we'll never push a tool to a startup. So you can give it us, you can give that, you can do the full relationship, but we'll never ask, a startup to join a tool, use a tool, or anything like that. And that's fair. I think historically that's been like that. Absolutely. But I think we're at a juncture here that, some people have called us, well, you're building a CRM for the VC world. And I'm like, well, No, because if you look at CRM today, it's a really bad world. It's very crowded market and it's not two-sided. You don't buy Salesforce and invite your customer to the platform. It's very rare. I mean, there's no like, yes, a community maybe, but that's not, hey, come to the platform. Let's figure out how we close this deal, right? This is what we're really building. And so we're really trying to change the game here. And yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Obviously there's a bell curve for any reaction. So you're going to get some of the heck yeahs and maybe maybe that's not for us kind of response. So I think that it's leaning more
great
towards
feedback to your point. It's always feedback and that, that teaches something. It gives us an insight and then we can take that and incorporate or find ways to incorporate to maybe, get them down the line. You never know. So,
yeah. Well, I imagine too, you're well in the weeds of this every day, but it seems as if the funding environment, even in the last, call it 6 to 8 months, has become a little bit more conservative in terms of what VCs are looking for, especially as PE is starting to come down market. How does Boxsy help enable founders to navigate that challenge?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in the last year or so is absolutely right. I mean, some of the bigger funds have come down, and therefore they have requirements that are very different than the typical seed. You used to have to hit 100K AR. That was a seed, right? You were ready for a seed. And Series A was 1 million AR, and you were ready for a Series A. And all those numbers, because of those bigger fund coming down or earlier stage, have pushed that, to be honest, right? It's more 250 to 500K now for a seed, or 2 to 3 million for an A. And you're like, wait, it used to be easier, what's going on? And so, from that perspective, I think this is where, and that's what we're trying to build is also, it has to be a bit of a quid pro quo, right? If you really want startup to give you maybe more visibility and transparency, you have to give them a bit of more visibility and transparency on, yes, I'm a pre-seed fund, this geo, I do AI, whatever, Web3. Okay, that's great. But at least give us a couple of metrics you're going to be always looking at, you know what I mean? And a range of it to say, hey, actually AR for us, we want to see at least that much. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you give us that, the goal is for a startup to kind of subscribe almost to those metrics and say, okay, well, I will share my data with, let's say, Fund A. And because I know that if I hit that number or that range, then they're going to re-engage with me maybe more quickly, right? Because they get alerted and say, hey, that company you were tracking now has reached the threshold, the minimum threshold. It's not the only reason for them to invest in you, but at least you've reached that, right? And so if you start doing that, then there starts really now the transparency work, and it's quid pro quo, right? It's like, well, then I don't need to I've now talked to Fund A, but I know that until I hit those numbers, I have to work on that, right? There's no point of me wasting time reaching out to Fund A until, I really do that. And I think that's also just from a sanity, for a founder. We're all like, oh my God, we're running out, we got to go raise money. And that would be helpful to be like, I will not waste my time until we hit those numbers. So I'll subscribe. And when I hit the numbers, hopefully they'll re-engage with me, but then I can focus on other funds, or I can just focus on the business, to be honest, right, to hit those numbers. And so I think from that perspective, that's where, as the change, those changes, I think that's where, we're trying to build a platform to help with those changes. And when, again, maybe seed is going to go back to 100K AR, maybe it's going to go back up, I don't know. But then we have that flexibility in the platform to be able to do that. So at least founders know that, hey, let's stop doing the 200 cold outreach, but go find 200 investors, do the outreach, hope for the best, 60 calls, 3 investments. Like, can we change that? Can we really just, be like, no, that's not how it's going to work anymore. You know what I mean? And streamline this. So hope the changes are good, to be honest, I think.
Well, I imagine, to your point on transparency, at least it starts to redefine what is new standards that are somewhat kind of opaque and hard to really, even honestly, when you're on the phone with a VC or a PE fund, it's sometimes hard to even pull that out.
I mean, they're keeping it close to the chest. You know what I mean? It's normal. I mean, normal in a way, because we've been so used to that for some of us, right? But I don't think they have to give everything away, right? Sometimes it's just a couple of things that would help, that would benefit them anyway. And so I think from that perspective, it's going to be interesting to see, as we continue, and what feedback we're going to keep getting, and if we can push through. Yeah.
Well, right. And I mean, from the standpoint of having worked on the growth equity side, it makes for at least more qualified conversations on both sides of the table, where, it's not as if you're just on a Salesforce cadence of reaching out every 6 months to get the update. It's like, let's talk when it makes sense to talk, versus just trying to keep something alive that really isn't great for anyone for 20 minutes.
Yeah, we're hoping for that.
Yeah,
for sure. And then hoping, meaning that's the goal. And then the goal is also, as we get this critical mass on both sides, can we then, in a certain way, secure way, be able to maybe say, hey, those investors, hey, startups, are you interested in those investors, that fit into your thesis or what you're building? You're close to the numbers that they're looking for. Do you want to subscribe to them, meaning, share with them or anything like that, and vice versa, right? Like, could we start surfacing startups that have not met maybe with certain investors? Do you know what I mean? And then start recommending some more qualified deal flow without, get it, right? Very protective of data. And I understand that. So we will not be like sharing data across investors or sharing data across, but, do we find a way to also help generate more qualified deal flow for investors, right?
Sure.
In an automated fashion. I think that's what we're trying to do. And don't get me wrong, I don't think we've sorted that out yet. Like, we have like a very defined solution for that, but that's something that we've heard, that it's like, oh, wait, but if you have all this population on the platform, eventually assume critical mass, you might be able to surface for us, like, startups that would make more sense. So yeah.
Makes sense. And I think kind of segueing on that, but also looping back a little bit on some of the interest level and the responses that you guys have had. Of the responses that are on more of the positive right side of the bell curve that are interested, has there been a difference either in comparing the US and Europe within those responses?
Well, because being French, I'm born and raised, I still have a lot of connections and reconnected to the French founders community, and even the UK, worked in the UK and all that. And so what's been interesting in Europe is when you talk to certain funds or even founders, and I shouldn't say all of Europe, so bear with me, but I know in certain countries, mine included, founders have a tendency not to want to share anything with their investors, which was really interesting to get some of the feedback of, some of the funds being like, you're never going to get a French founder to share that with us. And I was like, wait, why? But how do they get help then if you don't know what's going on? Like, how can you help them? And I know they really control the narrative and all that. And so I think it's going to be a bit more difficult in Europe, I think, based on historically what the mindset has been. I think, we do have an opportunity to, if we become a bit of the standard in the US, that if you're a European company, then you have to, you gotta change to get on Boxsy. You'll get invited to Boxsy, and then you'll have to decide whether you share or not to maybe, get to the US or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's a bit, it's a bit more quote unquote private and, in terms of transparency, but I think it would definitely, same use case, same benefits, same goal out there.
Well, I mean, relative to something like PitchBook, it sounds like you guys are offering much more of a curated look depending on the relationship and what that kind of both sides are looking for in terms of founders having access and ability to tailor what they're sharing, but then also funds being able to engage with groups that they might not otherwise be aware of, in a little bit more of a directed way relative to like a PitchBook. Nothing against PitchBook.
No, I mean, I think the idea is to basically merge that, and again, I'm going to call it publicly available data, and PitchBook, you have to pay for it, right? So I'm not saying that, but those usual data sources is not proprietary data, right? I mean, whatever they say, it's not like you don't have direct access to the founders and the company and be seeing really exactly what's going on from an operational perspective. So that's really what we're trying to do by bringing the two sides together on the platform, is how do we get obviously all the publicly available data, but we also get for the investors that view of proprietary data, that then you make better investment decisions, right? You're not just guessing based on market research or anything like that, or what the founder's just telling you. You're actually like, hey, founders, I'd like to see those at least 3 metrics directly from your system, or just whatever, and let's talk about it. So then you make, you de-risk the investment, and, it's more aligned with what you do. Because at the end of the day, it's funny, I was talking to an investor, I think yesterday, or 2 days ago. And it was almost like, we do due diligence early stage, but at the end of the day, due diligence is really post-investment. And I thought that was a very interesting comment, where you're like, well, it shouldn't be, right? You should have enough in hand that you're making an educated decision. Yes, it's early stage, so you won't have the same historical data than late stage. I get that, but I would think that you would want to have at least some visibility. So I thought that comment was very funny, very like, yeah. This is what we're trying to change here, so you don't discover that it's a wrapper around an LLM, right? That it's not, all these, they have all these users, but revenue is, there's no revenue or whatever, right? At least you're clear on what you're signing up for.
Yeah.
And you might still sign up for that company, don't get me wrong, but at least okay, this is where we need to help them for them to really hit the mark as we invest in them. So, yeah.
Yeah, you want to be investing on more than just vibes. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. I met an angel investor a few weeks ago, and now that we can all build something in 5 days, vibe coding and all that, there's a lot more startups out there, and a lot more startups trying to raise, whether pre-seed and, some was thinking, how do I seed strap? And, I don't want to raise that much VC fund, but still want to find money or, capital. And he was saying, I'm getting really challenged because one, there's so much noise in the sense of so many more startups are coming out because of the ability to build so much, especially in SaaS, right? So much faster. So everybody wants to be a founder. Everybody wants to sell something. And so he has trouble getting through the noise. And then when he finds finally a really good company that gets swept away by Sequoia or somebody else, like a fund. And he's like, I'm missing these deals because they're not going to come with me, Bain's come or whoever, right? And I'm just angel investor. And I was like, yeah, that's why we're building this, right? So you can get through the noise, quicker and then maybe engage with that startup faster. So you can at least get the first check in. Do you know what I mean? Because it's getting harder even for investor to, figure out what company is really fundable, to be honest, right? Because we're all building stuff. So.
Certainly.
Well,
for prospective founders that might be listening to the podcast or watching it, do you have any advice, and also just from your experience at Boxsy and PwC, as to like the best ways to go about kind of initial marketing efforts to get the concept, at least the conversation started that a new startup exists and into the minds of the right people and networks?
Yeah, I think, it's really twofold. There's, before you have a product, as you're doing validation, I think, I dug into my network, to be honest. And again, I didn't go very far, right? I had been in the ecosystem for some time. So talking to as many founders and early stage operators, that's what I did. So don't underestimate the value of your network as you're finding ideas or you're validating an idea and then start getting interest, right? Because it starts as soon as you talk to people, especially if you have a compelling story, you're listening to them, you're getting their feedback and you're like, this is what I think I'm going to build, and getting their reaction. This is already a potential customer in the long run or a potential investor or, something. Right? They could refer you to somebody eventually or anything like that. And to be honest, I've had a referral exactly through that, right? One of my first founder I interviewed way back, ex-colleague of mine, fellow founders. I still have him on my investor update. I mean, they're not really they're more like friends, family, advisor of Boxsy. He ended up making an intro to a potential partner, investor, customer, right? So, absolutely do not undervalue your network, and then don't hesitate to reach out to, if you don't have, like you're building something and you don't have the network directly, your first circle, like people you really know first circle. I think LinkedIn has been actually very helpful with that, right? But don't go at it by trying to sell. It's more like, hey, I'm validating an idea, and I'll be the first one to accept those calls. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll talk to you about quote to cash and my experience with it and, pain points. So I think people are more willing, even if you don't know them, if you're not trying to sell, but you're trying to validate a pain point. I think most people are doing that. And again, same thing, they become potentially a prospect, partner, you name it, right? And then post product, and we're dealing with that right now in terms of marketing. It's really hard because you can spend a lot of money really quickly. But now with AI, I mean, I think this is like prime for marketing in terms of really leveraging engagement and what I call social listening and warm outreach. So, everybody tries like, oh, I'm going to do a bit of Google ad or LinkedIn ads, super expensive. Or I'm going to do cold outreach. Let's go send millions of, emails. Let's do a list and go send the list. And, I get those too, right? Junk, they get in junk. You don't open them. You barely delete them. So cold outreach is getting really difficult. So I would absolutely recommend post product as you're really building interest, whether it's for marketing, wait list or anything like that, to start really leveraging the AI tools to do social listening, who's talking about the problems you're trying to fix, reach out to them. It's almost we're becoming a B2C model, even in B2B, where you're like, I have to go find who my influencers are. Yeah. Who are going to be our advocates, right? And we can convince them that we're building something really great and then just be out there. That's what I would say. Like, I think the old B2B marketing is dead. And again, maybe that's controversial. It's kind of finding those new ways with AI to do more and really get to find your supporters, right? Somehow your advocates and your influencers. That's what I would recommend. And it's not easy, don't get me wrong, but it's doable with the tech we have now.
Totally agree. That's we subscribe to the same philosophy. I think B2B SaaS has changed dramatically within the last 5 years, and it's exactly moving in the direction you just described. I think relationships and authenticity are the way to cut through some noise, but there's ways to augment that, especially with small teams with AI.
Yeah.
So kind of going a little bit deeper into that, what would be the like ideal founder fit or investor fit for the platform on Boxsy?
Yeah, so we're targeting bootstrap to Series A on the startup side. And, we're really make it super easy for them to onboard. Like I said, we have really refocused on two things, single pane of glass. So we get their data from all their operational systems, give them their metrics, and insights on that, as well as investor relations. So we've built an entire module now to really manage your data room, your investor updates, your fundraising pipeline. We're really trying to make it super productive for founders to not have to, like me right now, because we haven't migrated to the tool yet, like my spreadsheet for fundraising tracker and all my investors. I need to keep on my investor updates and things like that. And you could be like, well, you could use Airtable or HubSpot, Elizabeth, for all this. And absolutely, but it's still not great for this kind of purpose. Anyway, so we're bootstrapped to Series A. And then on the investor side, and again, it's not just investors, it's also ecosystem partners. We're targeting, obviously, VC funds, CVCs, accelerators, incubators, anybody that has a cohort or program where they look at applications also and then make decisions, put them into, like Techstars, like for example, right? So we're looking at all these professional association, anybody that's helping entrepreneurs and really tracking that from first touch all the way to post program, really what it means and being able to re-engage with them and all that. So it's pretty wide. I know people hear investor, they think, oh, you're targeting VCs only. No, and it's mainly early stage VC with at least, 10 portfolio companies, because that's when it's become a bit more difficult to track, portfolio metrics and all that, but also just managing your pipeline. We're really trying to, hey, if you're using Affinity CRM, Visible.vc, and standard metrics, well, we're trying to break the silos and be one platform and, be better and cheaper and more, more efficient there. So that's our target segment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, assuming continual traction along a lot of those lines, where would you see in a dream state Boxsy going over the next 12 to 24 months?
My big goal is finding product market fit. I mean, one of the fears I always had when I started building was, what if we build something that nobody wants, right? And I think, until you got that real PMF, and PMF means different things to different people. I mean, you ask 3 different founders, it's like, when do you know you have PMF, right? So it's a bit difficult. It's that gray area, but that's really the goal, sooner rather than later, obviously, to get PMF and make sure that, we're on the right track. We're building something people want, which then will drive, traction and revenue. And therefore, we really want to stay lean from a capital perspective. Can we prove that we can build a company with a minimal amount of people, being an AI first company, and then breaking even sooner rather than later. And so that's what's been, if you're asking me 24 months, my financial model and my goal is to have a solid PMF, solid business, and have broken even in less than 2 years. That's really the vision there, just from a company perspective. In terms of where we are in 24 months, is that we've built PMF, but we've moved also out of fundraising operations for founders, and we really continued towards the vision of the agentic COO for founders and small businesses or entrepreneurs, where we're really helping them take care, or we're on our way to helping them take care of all the crap we don't want to do as founders. That's still in our goal. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It's like, how far can we go to really deal, we can orchestrate that. And it's not rebuilding all the operational systems, but being that business management layer and insights for entrepreneurs to really do that and try to take care, like, hey, don't forget to pay your taxes. As simple as that, right?
Right.
Like, hey, your deadline is this, so that's this is hopefully 24 months from now, we're really further down the line on that vision. And on the other side, we continue being that standard, relationship OS, and with adjacent, services for the VCs to continue being able to be transparent, and maybe not just with startup, but with their LPs too, and being able to bring the LPs to the tool and say, hey, this is my pipe, this is what I'm looking at. Because I think a lot of LPs now are looking for that transparency too, on how are you making your investment decision? Who are you looking to, how are your companies doing? And so, adjacently building some of those other use cases that make sense and bring the entire ecosystem to 2 degrees, removed to the platform potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of both well-defined economic metrics, but also then just in terms of a strategic placement within the ecosystem. I think that's really encouraging. And I think with that at place, you're going to be funding and creating a community that's pretty dang self-sustaining.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's startups being founded every day. It's the scary part. So the limit or the supply on the side is limitless, if we've built something that really supports founders and entrepreneurs, right? And so we're really trying to then, to your point, build the wheel to get the entire ecosystem, if we can, on the platform. That's really the goal. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in terms of then kind of your team build out with AI, I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. I imagine that the seats that you need have changed dramatically, even within the last 18 months relative to what you saw in PwC. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And as it relates to founders that are looking to build their teams, how have you been able to use AI to maybe push off that first or maybe even fifth hire?
It's interesting you say that. So last Friday, I basically spent 6 hours building one module for my product. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to say, I was going to say screw this. So I'm going to say it. You can cut it.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Doing editing. But I was like, screw this. I'm going to try to build this thing on my own on V0 from Vercel. And I'm going to set up a super base backend so at least I can figure out how far I can go. And I'm not going to disrupt the team there, right? That's something I would not have been able to do a year ago, right? Or 18 months ago, right? The tools were not there. They were not as good as they are today. And so we started with a product designer last summer, right? And now I'm like,
Yeah.
some stuff happened, right? Our product designer left back in December or something, and I didn't replace him. I was like, you know what? I'm going to figure it out.
Gotta limit your
I'm going
burn.
to use the AI tools, and it's not going to be perfect, but we can start and ship something, and and then we'll refine over time, and then yes, at some point we'll bring somebody in. They're going to be like, yeah, we have to overhaul some stuff, but there's areas of the business like that where before you were like paralyzed. Oh, well, I'm not a product designer. What do I do? We need somebody, and now it's like, okay, you can survive without one for some time, right? Again, I'm not saying those roles are completely going to disappear, but like, hey, you don't need to spend money on that, right? Marketing is the same way. It's like, how far can you take AI to automate some of that social listening and content creation? I am a big heavy chat user. I'm not gonna lie. And so, that's another place where I'm not hiring anybody right now. I mean, I have a couple of hours of contractor because I'm still not a marketer. So I have to admit, like, certain things, it's not my area of expertise. But from a hiring, we're not, even on the financial projections and model, there's nobody being hired until January. And even that, after January, I'm like, can this person do the job on his or her own for at least another 2 years? Do you know what I mean? So it's like, it's almost like, yeah, of course you're not just going to stay. I mean, some people would challenge me. We have been talking about the solo entrepreneur and how far can a solo entrepreneur can build a $1 billion company, and we'll see if it happens, right? But even if you don't go to that extreme of one person, one person company, there is now the ability for you to stretch and say, well, no, actually, even if I decide to bring somebody full time to really focus on demand gen, well, how far can this person go with AI that we don't need to add somebody else, right? And now you're, okay, we'll be breaking even with a team of 8. I don't know, making something up, right? Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. It's
okay,
not, it
we'll
can be
be
a team of 20 now.
yeah. Yeah. And we most likely will stay team of 8 or 10, whatever, less than that, I don't know, for some time, because we'll keep adding those AI powered processes or anything like that, or tools, And so that's really what I think. Some of those areas that I've been, that's not, I'm not going to go higher. I can't. I mean, you don't want to. You want your runway to last longer, but there's no point right now. You don't have there's no need. It's a bit crazy to say that out loud, but it's true.
Absolutely. Well, I guess then in terms of kind of like your U.S. focus, and as you guys are building out kind of more of a U.S. centric model that obviously is going to expand globally as the ecosystem and the community grows on Boxsy, are there certain regions, like is it kind of West Coast, East Coast? Is it like all three, and three being like the West Coast, Midwest, and like East Coast? Or is it like, are you finding pockets in the U.S. that have more of an interest, or like just a little bit more of a forward thought in this, or is it kind of scattered?
No, it's scattered. Actually, we even have customers from Canada. So some of our first startup customers are from Canada, which is interesting because out there they have way more non-dilutive ways to
Yes,
raise
yes.
capital, which I'm very jealous about. So no, it's, yes, main focus is North America. Let's call it Canada and
Yeah.
US right now. We did get some feedback from some of, potential user in Europe, but we can't move in that space quite yet. Some GDPR and other data residency that we need to get to eventually. But yeah, no, it's really interestingly, when we first launched last fall, 50 beta testers, it was not just SaaS. We thought mainly we would get SaaS beta testers. We got business freelancers, like people running services business, even telling us that some of the features could be really beneficial for them. And we were surprised because this was never a segment or an industry that we were going to go next, at least. I mean, we thought maybe one day, but not as fast. And we started getting like, no, actually, I could use this single pane of glass for my own business. We do use the same tools, HubSpot, with QuickBooks, Plaid, obviously bank account, all that. So, I think the expansion will go more first from an industry perspective, maybe before geo. I don't know. You never know. But there are a lot of things that are common across industries when you look at a small business, right? And then there's things that are absolutely different. But revenue is revenue, right?
Yes.
You might define it a bit differently. You might recognize it a bit differently. Revenue at the end of the day on your statements is revenue, right? So there's a lot of things that we can do, I think, that we can scale across, across sectors easily. And so we'll do that first because we got the interest from those beta testers, right? We got about 10% to 20% that were service providers. As an
Fascinating.
example.
That makes a lot of
Health
sense,
tech was
though.
another one. Yeah, health tech was another one, which I'm not a healthcare, or health tech expert, so I would need some help from somebody. But we got some, in some of those other areas, providing feedback, and so that was great. Yeah.
So for prospective founders, what's the best way that they can get in touch with you or your team or to learn more about Boxsy and like how the pricing works and all that stuff?
Well, easily, you can go to boxsy.io, and we're about to relaunch this month a V2 of the product. So please feel free to sign up on our waiting list. And then if not, always happy to talk to other founders. If I can be of any help, LinkedIn's the best way to get to me. And if you have any questions or anything like that, even for, investors or ecosystem partners trying to streamline a bit how they recruit companies in their program, always happy to have a conversation and see if we can help. So yeah.
Well, Elisabeth, I really appreciate your time. I think this is going to be some really helpful content for a lot of both founders and investors. So this is really exciting that you guys are working on this and bridging gaps that otherwise I think are pretty unmet.
Well, thanks for having me today.
Absolutely.